Good morning, everyone. Respected Principal Professor S.T. Janetius, Honorable Guest Dr. Jigme Wangchuk, Controller of Examinations, Sikkim State University, respected Administrative Head Mr. Peter Banks, distinguished professors, scholars, academicians, and my dear students and colleagues. Once again, I, on behalf of the Department of History, welcome you all to the webinar lecture series on Highlanders of Northeast India. Today, we have the fourth lecture. So for today, we have with us Dr. Jigme Wangchuk to speak about the Highland Trade Dynamics of the Sikkim Himalaya 1642 to 1904, Economic and Societal Perspective. So it's all about the trade dynamics of the Sikkim Himalaya from pre-colonial to colonial era. I am thankful to our today's speaker. Despite of his busy schedule, he is joining us and coming forward to share the knowledge on the said topic. I am very thankful to him. And also I am thankful to each and everyone who are joining us today. One information I wanted to share with you that we are very sorry for the third lecture, what we postponed to mid-October because of some issue. So once the date is finalized, we will share the information with you all. So thank you for joining us. Now I welcome once again to you all for this webinar lecture organized by the Department of History, St. John College, Dimapur, Nagaland. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for the welcome address. Now I request our student, Martin L. Sangtam, to please introduce our guest of honor.
First of all, a very good morning to you all present here. Firstly, I give respect to our speaker, our principal and teachers, and to all my fellow friends present here. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Martin L. Sangtam, and I'm currently in my third semester, and I'm also the department representative for the history department. And secondly, on behalf of all the students and my colleague present here, I would like to welcome and thank you, sir, for joining here with us on this webinar. And we are hoping to get some knowledge and experience from you. Well, to all the teachers, faculties, and students present here, our speaker for today's webinar is none other than Dr. Jigme Wangchuk, who is the controller of the examination of Nar Bahadur Bhandari Govt College, Gangtok, Sikkim, and Sikkim State University, and is also affiliated with the Department of History. He has also been an executive member of the Northeast Indian History Association, that is NEIHA Sikkim Chapter. He is also one of the chief editor for the Gazette of Sikkim 2013, Department of Home Affairs and Government of Sikkim. He is also the member of State Level Implementation Committee, that is SLIC, for Heritage Preservation and Management of Culture Affairs, and Heritage Department and Government of Sikkim. And from these few words, I would like to end the introductions for our today's speaker, that is Dr. Jigme Wangchuk. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, for the lovely introduction of our guest speaker. Now I request Dr. Jigme Wangchuk to take over the virtual platform and grace us all with his intellectual modernity and his lecture. You're welcome, sir, to this platform. And since it's COVID and we have to welcome you only virtually, I hope in future we can welcome you in person. So welcome, sir, and we are really excited and waiting for your graceful lecture in this platform. Thank you, sir.
Well, Kuzanko and Tashidile, greetings from Sikkim. At the outset, I would like to thank the principal of St. John's College, Dimapur, Nagaland, Professor Genesis, the administrative officer, and of course, the head of the history department, Sri Mukhtar Saikia, and his colleagues for inviting me to deliver and share my research interest in this virtual gathering, especially with the young and brilliant minds. To this platform, I also extend my wishes to my colleagues and our senior especially Professor Amina Pasa, which I saw on the list. It was really good to see you, madam. And I hope to see you offline, that is on in person, when the NEHA once again resumes its annual session.
Thank you.
Today, I
hear from you. All the best.
Today, I shall be talking on the aspects of highland trade in the Sikkim Himalaya, and also analyze the two major highland communities of Sikkim, that is the Lepchas and the Bhutias, their socio-economic positions in the past, and how they sustained themselves in an environment with a very limited resource by adopting commodity exchange through trade with their adjacent kingdoms. I shall, in due course, highlight how the communities molded and invented social norms to cater to their commercial operations, and how they adapted their trading practices under British imperialism during the early part of the 20th centuries. Now, to begin with, the Sikkim Himalaya is an important geomorphological unit of a larger Himalaya. The mosaic of cultural fusion that had historically evolved through the ages bears the testimony to the fact that the region has a very special, significant status insofar as the ethnicity and its diverse socio-cultural traditions of its people, as an interface between the probably world's two most ancient civilizations, that is Tibet, which is now, of course, under China, and India. The Sikkim Himalaya forms a milieu of multicultural symbiosis. Trade, on the other hand, influences not only the socio-economic aspects of human life, but is also an important concomitant of human history. The rugged terrain of the Himalayan highlands hindered maximization of the land use for the purpose of agriculture, thus making trade an important source of economic sustenance. It is observed generally that in the Himalayan region, the inhabitants of high, stony, and inhospitable mountains are conspicuously richer than the people living in agriculturally more prosperous regions. And the reason for this was trade and the network Dr. Saikia?
Yes, sir. You're audible.
Yes. Yes, you are audible now.
Yeah, I'm really sorry I was cut in the between because there was a power outage in our area, so I had to switch on to another form of network.
Oh.
So
Okay,
shall I continue where I left off?
Yes, sir. Yes.
yes.
Yeah. So Yeah, so I was talking in terms of the position of Tibet during the 7th and the 8th centuries. So what happened was that during the mid-7th and the 8th centuries AD, Tibet had emerged as a mighty military power and had become an active agency of new civilization all over the highlands of Asia. This led to the development of a prosperous trade network in the Himalayan region, which was primarily centered on Tibet. Now, Sikkim occupied a very significant geopolitical position in the eastern Himalayas, with Bhutan in the east, Nepal in the west, India in the south, and Tibet to its north. The landlocked Sikkim occupied a very strategic position on the Indo-Tibetan frontier. Why? Because of the fact that it primarily provided access to the most quickest and the direct route from Tibet to the plains of India. Here, the highland entrepreneurs, particularly the Lepchas and the Bhutias, played an important role in the entrepot trade. Later, this strategic position of Sikkim was eventually acknowledged by the English East India Company, and from the mid-17th century, it started to engage in commercial transactions with Tibet via Sikkim. Thus, they were able to channelize the British imperial engines onto the highlands of the Himalayas. Now, if you happen to talk about this pre-colonial trade which existed between Sikkim and Tibet, we can see that the trade was primarily conducted through the mountain passes. And these mountain passes, colloquially or locally, were called as La. There were a few prominent laws or passes, such as the Nathula, the Jelepla, the Chola, Lacheng, Lachung, Donkia, and 6 other minor passes. It was through these passes that trade was regularly conducted. The replete and the elaborate passes that connected these kingdoms were well navigated through ages for trade and trade-oriented commerce. It was protracted by hardy and resilient highland trading communities, which often operated in a network of carefully crafted and a fragile economic structure. The indigenous highland communities of the Lepchas and the Bhutias were actively engaged in trade and often acted as an economic hinge between these two kingdoms. The traditional Sikkimese economy and its structure was primarily agro-based. But the topography of Sikkim made it difficult for all its inhabitants to engage in large-scale agriculture. So they sought to exchange commodities, and this trade was carried out both at the domestic level, based upon barter system, and also at the frontier level with Sikkim's adjacent kingdom. If you happen to look into the communities who were the two primary communities who were engaged in the trade, they were the Lepchas belonging to the Zongu region of North Sikkim, and the Bhutia communities of Lachenpas, of Lachung Pass and the Tomo Pass. The Lepchas, they are in fact the autochthonous of Sikkim and are one of the elements of heterogeneous Mongoloid stock living in the Himalayas on the southern and the eastern slope of Mount Kanchenjunga. The areas that encompass the confluence of Lachen Chu, Lachung Chu, or the rivers, and Dikchu were the main areas of their settlement. These communities of Lepchas from Sikkim inhabiting the Zongu Reserve in North Sikkim practiced cross-border trade with the Tibetans. During the pre-colonial times, these Lepchas, particularly of Zongu, traveled abroad to obtain the goods like clothes, threads, which they often used for making fabrics, salt, and metal goods. The Lepchas collected the red dye wood, which is colloquially called as vim, or it can also be called as paharia manjit, from the forest, because these were particularly used for dyeing clothes. These vims were collected from the forest, and the Lepchas took it along with the other surpluses to the Tibetan border, where they exchanged for salt and wool. Thereafter, these Lepchas took the exchanged salt to Darjeeling and sold them, or exchanged them, in fact, with threads and ready-made piece clothes. Now, having said all these, we mentioned about Darjeeling. It is pertinent to understand here that Darjeeling was once a part of the Sikkimese kingdom and was annexed in the year 1835 for the creation of a sanatorium site for the British officials. Now, during the British Raj, Darjeeling's temperate climate led to its development as a hill station, which started eventually attracting immigrants to cultivate the slope and also to stimulate trade. And this resulted in large-scale migration, where 100-fold increases in the population were seen. And between 1835 to 1849, Darjeeling emerged as a major commercial hub. Now, until the 19th century, the Lepchas in the Zongu areas, they used to take the forest dyes, or the vim, to Lachen in North Sikkim and bartered or exchanged them for Tibetan salt and wool. They kept a certain amount of salt for their own personal consumption, but the bulk of it was taken to Darjeeling, where they exchanged it for raw cotton, particularly for weaving their clothes. But however, this trade was later taken over by the moneylenders and the banias from the mainland India, which eventually ousted these Lepcha local traders. Now, one interesting aspect about their adaptation or the adaptation towards the changing situations, towards the circumstances of trade, is with the fact that both the communities of Lepchas and Bhutias developed resourceful customs. These customs were particularly developed to continue their trading operations and also receive hospitality and protection in foreign countries. One such interesting tradition of which both the lecturers and the Bhutias adopted was the practice of forging artificial kinship of sworn brotherhood. Here, there was a submission of a kin group to the service and protection of an unrelated kin group. And these customs were known differently across Sikkim, such as Ingzong in lectures and Thoku in Bhutias respectively. These unique traditions were often rooted in their culture and were sanctified by the religion itself. This unique practice played a very instrumental role in the socio-economic exchange as the traders frequented the Himalayas for trade and religious pilgrimages, as it promoted social cohesiveness and also led to economic benefits. Now, let me talk about the communities of the Bhutias, the community which I belong to. The Bhutias, or Bhotias as it is pronounced, it is a generic term, and it is used to illustrate the people of Bhut or of Tibetan origin. In their own languages, the Bhutias call themselves as Hopo or Hori, which means dwellers of the south. And they constitute one of the earliest inhabitants of Sikkim. They are considered as the next race to migrate into Sikkim from Tibet, invariably long before the accessions of the Chogyals as the rulers of Sikkim in the 17th century. The Chogyals, or the Dharma Rajas of the community of the Bhutias, later led to the state formation in Sikkim under the aegis of the Tibetan authorities, thereby adopting the Mahayana form of Tibetan Buddhism as the state religion. For the Bhutias, who lived primarily on the borders of Tibet, pastoral farming was the most important occupation, as they could graze their cattle in Tibet during their seasonal stay in that country. There were essentially two highland Bhutia communities of Lachen and Lachung of North Sikkim, who were essentially herdsmen and were actively engaged in the trans-border trade. The Bhutias of Lachen and Lachung for centuries had grazed their yaks and sheep in the Khambazong section of the Phari district in Tibet. During the summer and the fall months, they practiced transhumance and often sustained themselves by engaging in trade, pasturing, and also agriculture. These Lachungpas and the Lachenpas, during the summer months, they crossed over to Tibet with textiles and a limited range of consumer goods, which was in great demand in Tibet. And in return, they brought back black wool, salt, and borax. Many of them had traditional trading partners in Tibet, and many Lachungpas and Lachenpas had made considerable investment in the Tibetan trade. These communities of Bhutias practiced agriculture, pasturage, and trade and played an important role in the border trade between Sikkim and Tibet. The Tibetan black wool, which they usually brought back, were essential raw materials for the traditional handicrafts such as carpet making and the weaving of blankets, tweeds, etc. The Lachenpas and the Lachenpas also held a fair-sized sheep and yak herds. These two communities were heavily dependent on trade for grazing. Animals of Lachen spent several months in Tibet, and those from Lachung were seldom brought back even in the winters. By the year 1860, we find that the government of India had connected Darjeeling with the mainland India. British mercantilism brought along extensive connectivity with new roads connecting Bengal with Sikkim and beyond. In an instance, J.W. Grant, who was the commercial resident at Malda, he in fact recommended to open traffic not only between themselves, but also between Bengal and the Chinese territory. And by this time, the British was also very much focused towards the construction of route to Lhasa through Sikkim. Coleman Macaulay, who was the secretary of the state to the government of Bengal and a member of the Legislative Council, was deputed to Sikkim by the Lieutenant Governor in the year 1884, primarily to ascertain commercial possibilities. Upon the completion of his survey, a report was published entitled as Report of a Mission to Sikkim and the Tibetan Frontiers by the Bengal Secretariat Press, Calcutta, in the year 1885. This report was a preliminary survey by the British government to initiate commercial links with Tibet via Sikkim. In his report, he mentions, Coleman Macaulay, he mentions that the local inhabitants of the Lachung Valley in North Sikkim conducted trade with Tibet through the Donkia Pass. These Lachung Pass
Sir, you are not audible to us.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Now you're audible.
Oh, what? Like you should have, in fact, this thing interrupted me a long time ago, because like
no,
I don't know, I've been like going on and on.
Seconds. No, sir, just 30 seconds. I think you are not audible.
Okay. So were you audible up to the fact that I was talking about the trading pattern of the Lachunpas, how they went, and the Macaulay's report?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, right. All right. Maybe something must have happened, a glitch and all. Nowadays we couldn't really rely on the technology aspect. So, Macaulay's report. I was talking about Macaulay's report, right? So Macaulay's report in his report, he talks about how the people from Lachung Valley in North Sikkim conducted trade with Tibet through the Dongkia Pass. He also mentions for the fact that these Lachung Pass really generally went to Tibet twice a year and took some of the locally produced products from the region, primarily to the city of Shigatse for trade. He mentions how a basket of vim or chen fetched 5 rupees in Shigatse, which they brought back after selling them, which they brought back black tea, salt, wool, etc., right? So after selling these chen or vims in Shigatse, the Lachungpa traders, they brought back black tea, salt, wool, blankets, some pottery, sheep and goats, while some traders took those sheep and wool to Darjeeling directly from Gyanse to Pali and then to Jelepla and fetched back to Lachung tobacco, raw Assam silk, and copper vessels. Others went down from Lachung to Gangtok with Tibetan salt, which they sold as far as Gar and Lingmo and fetched back Indian corn, morwa, and rice. Now, morwa is a type of a drink, which is a fermented drink, which is basically made out of millets, and it is very popular in the regions of the Sikkim Himalaya, where those millets are fermented, and it is drunk as a local beverage. Now, Macaulay, he also mentions in his report of his conversation back then with the Pipon. Now, on the Sikkim-Tibet trade. Now, the Pipon is the elected representative of Zumsa, which is the traditional system of local self-governance, which is prevalent in the 2 tribal villages of Lachen and Lachung. This system of self-governance was established during the first half of the 19th century in order to provide structure and cohesion for the societies and their activities. The traditional system of Zumsa, which was established back in the 19th century, is still prevalent in North Sikkim to this day, and it is constitutionally protected. It is still in operation, and the elections to the Pipons are held after every 4 years or so. The Pipon, at that point of time, in his conversation with Colin Macaulay, he explained that very few traders, they actually traveled through the Dongkia Pass. The reason? Because the terrain was extremely difficult, and that Lachen Pass was a relatively much easier choice. He further said that Lachung people generally visited Shigatse and Gyanse city in Tibet for trading purposes. So what we see at this point of time is that commissions and surveys were being increasingly set out towards the Himalayan frontier lands to ascertain the cost and the prospect of commercial viabilities. And Macaulay, for instance, when he went to the frontiers in 1884, he was trying to ascertain commercial links and also the possibilities of construction of roads from Bengal right up till Lhasa. So we can see the inroads of British commercialism from that point of time onwards. Now, by the beginning of 20th century, the Indo-Tibetan trade had flourished, particularly with the signing of the Lhasa Convention in the year 1904. It was in right up till its operation and its final closure up till 1962. This trade played a very important role in the enrichment of the Sikkimese economy. The route from Kalimpong, that is in West Bengal, earlier it was a part of Sikkim, of course. The route from Kalimpong to Lhasa passed through the southeastern Sikkim and crossed the frontier into Tibet via the Jelepla or the Jelepla Pass. After the opening of the Jelepla route, Sikkim now started acquiring its share in the Indo-Tibetan trade. Here, we see the emergence of another community, highland community of the Bhutia traders, who actively participated in the Indo-Tibetan trade via Sikkim. These sub-communities of the Bhutias were called as the Tomopas, right? Now let us briefly look into this community of the Tomopas. The Tomopas, they specialized in the transport of commodities through the rough highland terrain. They were the inhabitants of the Chumbi Valley, which lied in the frontier of Sikkim, and shared these borders with Tibet before the Chinese occupation. With the opening of this new trade route in 1904, the Tomopas, they emerged as a significant player in this entrepot trade. They controlled the trade between Thari at the Chumbi Valley and Kalimpong, which was about 95 miles from the Indian frontier. The Tomopas bought goods at one end and sold at the another, which included goods like wool, cotton piece goods, silk, indigo, vessels, enameled iron, aluminium, matches, soap, etc., etc. The Tomopas were also engaged in transport. In fact, they had specialized in the transport of commodities. The Tomopas were engaged in transport and kept Tangun ponies. Now let me talk about the Tangun ponies. These are because they are a very special breed of horses. These Tangun ponies were indigenous to Bhutan, and the trade which was being conducted over there, even during the pre-colonial periods and even during the colonial periods, the Tangun ponies were the quintessential beast of burden. And they were essentially indigenous to Bhutan, and it derived its title from the region in Bhutan in which they were bred. They were highly valued for their use as the beast of burden. And the Tomopas, apart from these Tangun ponies, they also reared yaks, which helped them to transport goods along the different mountain tracks between the two trade centers. The Highlanders of Sikkim, however, generally lacked the resource to carry out a voluminous trade, and they failed to compete with the trading communities, particularly from the plains. On the other instances, the British also did little to restrict the Indian traders, and practically did nothing to ensure that the trade should remain in the Sikkimese hand. Even the trade conducted by Sikkim with its neighboring kingdoms could not surpass a certain geographical space, and with limited dimensions of trade, it could not entail that level of volume in trade. Nonetheless, the indigenous highland communities of the Lepchas and the Bhutias did participate in the trade. The occupational identity of these two communities have mostly been associated with agriculture. But the foregoing discussion reflects that these highland communities were capable of a much more complex economic transaction, which entailed traveling through the mountain passes and transhumance. Thus, to conclude, the highland trading communities of the Sikkim Himalaya were not only the key apparatus to this elaborate trade, but it also adopted survival strategies which kept and helped them to conduct this trade and sustain their livelihood. Their ingenious trading tradition of forging artificial kinship and the specialization of trading routes, etc., all helped these traders to thrive in this elaborate trade network. The Himalayan trade nexus had multiple layers of agents who profited from this trade, such as the caravans, the muleteers, the porters who provided transportation, and also the innkeepers who provided food and shelters for the commuters. They played a vital role in the evolution and the prosperity of trade and formed a crucial part of the Sikkimese economic structure. The catenation of trade during the pre-colonial period was an organic one, as it assimilated and linked the society, thereby creating a symbiosis which was unlike the colonial trade, which was only focused on resource extraction. So with this note, I'd like to thank the Department of History, St. John's College, for providing me with this platform to share some of my research interest amongst the learned people and also amongst the very enthusiastic group of students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your bewitching and staggering lecture. I'm sure we have enjoyed it a lot, and most importantly, we have gained a lot of knowledge about another northeastern state, that is Sikkim. So with your permission, I would like to open the platform for questions. So anyone who has any question to sir, you can either write it in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and ask him the question.
If there are any queries and all, madam, what we can do is they can fire the questions at a single time. I'll note it down and then I'll try to answer or quell their inquiries one by one. So that would be much more appropriate. at least that is what I think. So
Okay,
if they can ask questions, I'll just write it down and then I'll try to answer them one by one.
Okay, sir. Any questions for sir?
Yeah, Avi, yeah, one of our students actually texted that like what were the main commodities exchanged on this trade route? What were the main commodities exchanged on this trade route? So that is one question. Yes. Secondly, one more. It is by Senjano. She texted that what was the volume of trade in Sikkim Himalaya comparison to Nepal? And thirdly, sir, actually, I wanted to know from you that yes, how did the commodities of the British Empire provide an impetus and pretext for imperial control of the Eastern Himalayas?
Yes. Any more questions? I've received 3 questions.
So there is a
yes.
question.
One more, yeah.
Yes. So it says that, do you see any difference in context to the trade dynamics of Sikkim back in the 20th century as compared to the present century?
And fast, right? All right. So do we have any more? I can take your queries, and if there are any more questions, I'll take it. In fact, I'm noting it down. Yes.
So there's
Yes.
another. Since Sikkim is
Yes.
regarded as world first organic state, can you please say something about ecological and economic benefits of organic state?
Fine. In fact, that is not my area of study,
Yes,
but
yes.
in fact, I'll try to answer them at the end of it. If it's up to your entertainment, I'll try
Yes.
to answer that, but that is not my actual field of study. Yeah.
So
So I think I'll take one last questions, and I think that could be, because like 6
So
questions
they-
at a row. And
so there's one
Yeah.
more question.
yeah, I think I saw it. That
Yeah.
box.
What was the societal impact on the Highlanders when trade was limited or curbed to the locals, with the impact of colonization and migration of plains men? Sir, I feel that this is all.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I've received a couple of questions, which I have noted it down. I hopefully have noted it down, and I will be able to explain to you as you had envisioned and had queried in your mind. So there was this first, I believe it was a question from the student who wanted to know about the commodities that were on exchange on these trading routes, right? So, trade routes, in my lecture, I have sectionalized the Himalayan trade into two halves: pre-colonial and post-colonial, right? Not post-colonial, pre-colonial and colonial. So during the pre-colonial period, when Sikkim was having this sort of a commercial transaction between Sikkim and Tibet, which was the epicenter of the erstwhile Himalayan trade network, the Sikkimese trading communities primarily took local producers. Say, for instance, they would take some wool, dairy products, vim or manjit, which I in fact often repeated in my lecture, which was a kind of a forest dyewood. This dyewood was primarily used to dye the woolen threads, which were used for making carpets and blankets and tweeds, so on and so forth, which was in great demand back in Tibet. So these commodities, dairy products, were primarily exported to Tibet. From Tibet, they imported commodities like, again, black wool. And one of the most important commodity, in fact, was salt, because Sikkim was a landlocked area, and back in those days, people did not have a very easy access to salt. So the Highland salt of Tibet, which was very popular and which was very good even for the medicinal purposes and all, were in great demand in the regions. In fact, in the whole of the Eastern Himalayas, Tibet was in fact one of the key suppliers of salt, and the trade which was carried on between the Eastern Himalayas, not only between Sikkim and Tibet, but also between Tibet and Bhutan, Tibet and Nepal, Tibet and Assam, these regions and all, salt was one of the key commodities which Tibet exported, all right? And this salt had generated a great network of trade. And in fact, we see a lot of Tibetan traders, particularly the salt traders, the caravans we used to go, they used to trade all across the highlands, exporting Tibetan salt. It was not until the late 20th century when the British replaced the Tibetan salt with a so-called Savar salt from the mines in Madhya Pradesh, that the demand for the salt slowly started to come down. Or else prior to the mid 20th century, Tibet was in fact the only kingdom to have supplied salt in this region. So salt was one of the major commodities of exchange. During the colonial times, we see that when the British acquired the territories of Darjeeling from 1835 onwards, we see more of Indian goods coming to Sikkim, and the traders, in fact, sometimes carried these goods, and they often exchanged and bartered them in the borders. These commodities were primarily Indian corn. Then we have British manufactured and finished peace goods, which were also in great demand. Borax was one of the important chemical which was in great demand, so on and so forth. So there were phases of the trade in which the communities of Sikkims involved themselves. One was the pre-colonial and during the colonial period, where both these communities were actively engaged in trading these commodities. All right. So I hope I've been able to quell your inquisitiveness on the commodity exchange part. The second question was on the volume of trade in Sikkim as compared to Nepal. Right. So, of course, if you happen to look geographically, Nepal is much more larger in the context of space. And the trade which was carried out between Tibet and Nepal during the pre-colonial period and Tibet of Sikkim was, in fact, the Nepal always had the majority of the volume of the trade in this context as well. Even during the colonial period, when the trade center started shifting from Tibet to Bengal, we see the volume of trade between Bengal and Nepal and Bengal and Sikkim. As compared to it, the volume of trade was obviously larger in favor of Nepal. Statistically speaking, we cannot really get a clear-cut idea on what was the actual volume of trade, because prior to 1875, we do not find any sort of record, even amongst the British administration, on the volume of trade. It was only after 1875 that the British also systematized this the account keeping on the trade transaction between Bengal and the kingdoms of the Eastern Himalayas. But prior to this, we do not find any sort of systematized report on the trade that was conducted between Bengal and the Eastern Himalayan kingdoms, as well as the volume of the trade. The only information which we find are all scattered in the accounts, in the journals of various British officials, so on and so forth, and some indigenous accounts which were written colloquially by these kingdoms. So we do not find any such record. But after 1875, we can particularly say that Nepal's volume of trade was in fact much larger than that of Sikkim, because area-wise also Sikkim is very small as compared to Nepal. So I hope I was able to answer your query regarding that portion. The third question was on commodities of British providing impetus to British imperialism. Yes. So what is happening here is, in this context, is that by the mid-19th century, and in fact, by the mid-century, the paramountcy of the British over the Indian subcontinent was complete, right? 1818, at the final Battle of Karki, the Marathas were defeated, and the British paramountcy or the supremacy over the Indian subcontinent was formally established. Now the Raj was there to stay. At the same time, in its metropolis, industrialization was making headways. There were commodities which required raw materials. Of course, the colonies were there which would provide them. Not only that, these finished products also required a market. And the possibilities of finding a market in the Himalayan region, particularly in the Eastern Himalayas, began as early as 1774. In fact, we find that during the time of Lord Vaughan Hastings in 1774, George Bogle was in fact commissioned by the company to find out the prospects of trade. In fact, he was the only person to have reached up till Shikatse, right? The only Britisher who have reached up till Shikatse on a recorded company official. So he went up to Shikatse first via Bhutan, and then they stayed for them for some time in Bhutan, and then he proceeded towards Tibet. And in Shikatse, he had this sort of a cordial relationship at Tashilongpo with the Panchen Lama, where he had this conversation and all. And when he came back, he proposed a report stating for the fact that Tibet was demographically, it was sparsely populated, and it required huge demands. In fact, the British goods were in huge demands in Tibet, and it often traded because Tibet had a very excellent mineral wealth. It had tons of gold mines in it, and they practically dealt and they practically transacted in gold dust. So the prospect of trade was very bright with Tibet, and this is what George Bogle highlighted in his report. And this gave a sort of an impetus to the British to initiate commercial links with not only Sikkim. In fact, Sikkim was a midway point to establish trade links with Tibet, so that it would find a much wider market and outlet for their finished product manufactured goods from England. All right. So I hope I was able to clarify you in that perspective. The other question was difference in the past and the present, right? So if we happen to look about the trade statistics and the volume of trade, like I said before, it was only after 1875 that we do find the record of the volume of trade. And let us talk about post 1875, when the British started recording this trade transaction. And if we happen to look in Sikkim in particular from 1904, with the signing of the Lhasa Convention and the opening of the Jalepla trade route, as compared to now, because in the year 2005, many of you may not be knowing about this fact that the Nathula Jalepla route is still in operation, because in the year 2005, I believe that the trade had resumed. As compared to the past, I would say the trade which had resumed and all is very negligible. And then again, with this continuous political tensions and border conflicts and all, the trade is very, very, very limited, I would say. And in the past, the trade was very, very good. And as compared to the present, in fact, it is negligible. All right. Now I'll move on to another question. Somebody was asking me on organic state. Okay, fine. So organic state being Sikkim being an first organic state in the world and all, it was a kind of an agenda which was led by the erstwhile government of the Sikkim Democratic Front under the leadership of Shri Pawan Chamling. So Sikkim has been projected as one of the organic states. In fact, yes, to a certain extent it is there, where in Sikkim, vegetables and all that are grown, and crops and all which are grown and all, people do not, the peasants over here, the farming community over here, they do not really subscribe to use of pesticides and all. In fact, at that level of standard has still been maintained over there, and we are glad for the fact that it has Sikkim has been projected as the world's first organic state. So that it is there, but it doesn't quite relate with my area of study, so I am not able to give you an adequate representation of the Sikkim as an organic state. Right. And the last question was on the impact of colonization. Right. Sikkim was not officially colonized as in case of Darjeeling and Kalimpong, because Sikkim was an independent entity. In fact, in the year 1835, like I said before, Darjeeling was annexed, and the adjacent territories were taken over by the Britishers in the year 1835 as to make a sanatorium for the British officials. Darjeeling, we can say that Darjeeling and Kalimpong were officially colonized with the British community came and they settled, established missionary schools and churches, and had quite a say in the settlements, economy, so on and so forth. But Sikkim, I would not say it was directly colonized, but we can in fact say, that is what my opinion is, we can say that the pressures of imperialism and colonialism was of course very much felt by the ruling dynasty, because from 1889 we do of course see a resident was being established by the Britishers. In fact, a political officer, John Claude White, was very instrumental in bringing about many changes in the Sikkim society as well. When we talk about the society of the Highland society, the Highland community engaged in trade, and the impact of colonization upon them, yes, do we see a large-scale migration of people, especially from the plains, the community of the Marwaris, the Banias. They came over there, they settled, they competed with the local traders. The local traders did not have, which I had already explained in my lecture, we did not have adequate resources to compete with the men from the plain, the businessmen from the plains. And actually, eventually, they were ousted out from the economy. Now, in fact, in the first half of the 20th century, when cardamom was introduced in Sikkim, it was in great demand, and people, the farming communities, the agriculturalist community from Sikkim, I wouldn't say as a farmer, because the agriculturalist communities from Sikkim, they engaged themselves in cardamom cultivation, and these banyas and the money lenders and all, they would often penetrate into the village, and they would lease out loans to the people, and exorbitant rates of interest was imposed upon them. In fact, it was one of the major issue, and a system of dadani had developed during that period. In fact, it was later on abolished by the ruling dynasty. So there was this level of exploitation from the money lenders from the plains of India, and this, we can say, it was one of the negative impacts of colonialism, where we see influx and trading communities coming from the plains of India, exploiting the local people, so on and so forth. So yes, that was one of the negative impact of colonialism in Sikkim. So that was the sixth questions. I hope I was able to satisfy most of your queries. I do not know about it. So thank you very much for your patience.
So we just have a last question. With your permission, may I also ask that?
Yes, of course, please.
So the last question is, under the Highland trade in the colonial period, what kind of social changes has happened, settled, or habitation in North Sikkim? And a continuation to this question is, how many changes and continuity has been seen in recent times?
Yes, Abhi,
yeah.
And this question is quite similar to this Kim Bhutia, what he is asking about that. It's quite similar, I think, what the question, yeah.
What was the other person's question?
So the other person's question was related to impact of colonization and migration of plainsmen. And the next person who's asked the question is changes that has happened or settlement that has taken place in North Sikkim and the continuity it has in recent times.
Yes. Right. So the second the person who had asked the questions, I would say it is more related to pertaining to the Highland communities who are residing on the frontiers, particularly the Lachungpas and the Lachungpas. In fact, there are even more other communities who practice transhumance. So we can see over here during the pre-colonial period and also during the colonial period, there are communities of pastoralists in North Sikkim, even apart from the Lachungpan and Lachungpas, and these communities, sub-communities are called as Drokpas. Drokpas here signify the yak herders. All right. They were not engaged in trade to the great extent, but they were greatly involved in pastoralism. These Drokpas, what these people did was they migrated during the summers to the Tibetan region in the Pari district, in the Pari-Khambazong region. And then they again migrated back during the summers, during the winters, down back to Sikkim. So their kind of lifestyle was continuously maintained over a long period of time throughout the centuries, right? It existed even during the pre-colonial period and even during the colonial period because the borders were not very well defined, right? What happened to these peoples, particularly after 1962 with the Chinese occupation of Tibet, and particularly after 1974-75 with the emergence of Sikkim with the Indian Union, it's for the fact that this community of the Drokpas, those who are Highlanders, pure Highlanders, I would say, these community of Drokpas and all, they find themselves stranded in between these regions. Now, practicing transhumance is not physically possible for these people. Of course, there are communities of people still in existence. They want to continue their ancestral profession, but there are certain hindrances which prohibit them from continuing their traditions. They often reside in remote areas and do not have access to proper education, proper health facilities, amenities provided by the government and all, but they are nonetheless a part of the state of Sikkim. And in fact, when we talk about status, in fact, there are Indians, but these communities are so remotely located, the Drokpas, so remotely located that they do not quite find themselves taking advantage of the provisions of democracy, right? So these communities were there. The impact economically, of course, is there because they cannot continue with transhumance practices. But as far as education purposes are considered, I don't think many of those peoples have quite been exposed to communities from the plains, and I don't think they have been exposed to certain Banya communities or what merchant communities or money lending communities and so on and so forth. And there is historical instances of them being charged of additional interest and all, and they're having commercial transaction with the communities from the plains. So they are very remote people, living in the fringes of the borders between Tibet and Sikkim, and they're still in existence. But yes, in fact, as compared to the past, now they are facing and they have faced certain disruption in their traditional life. Yes. That would be it. I was able to quell your queries. Yes.
Thank you so much, sir, for providing us this engaging platform of discussion. We really had a great knowledgeable exchange at this point of time. So with this, we come to the end of our program. And lastly, I would ask my colleague, Ms. Nungshi Lemla, to please give the vote of thanks for today's program.
Okay, thank you, ma'am, for the time. A very good afternoon, everyone. Most respected administrative head, our principal, our most esteemed speaker, dignitaries, academicians, and all the participants. I, on behalf of the History Department, St. John College, would like to propose a vote of thanks in conclusion to our event for today. So, first of all, I extend my deepest gratitude to our dignified speaker, Dr. Jigme Wangchuk, for gracing our event and enlightening us with your profound knowledge on Highland Trade Dynamics of the Sikkim Himalayas. I am most grateful to our administration for giving us the platform to organize such webinars amidst this pandemic. I thank our head of department, History, Sir Mukhtar, and my colleague, Ma'am Avi, for their untiring efforts in making this event possible. And last but not the least, I extend my sincere appreciation to all the participants for your presence and contribution towards making this webinar a great success. Our next webinar is on 5th of October at 3 p.m. I look forward to your participation in the coming lectures as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you so much, Nongshi.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for gracing our program today. We really enjoyed your lecture, and we are taking back with us a lot of knowledge about the Highlanders of Northeast, especially Sikkim, and also the economic activity that was carried on between India and Tibet. Thank you, sir, and thank you everyone for being present here today and gracing our program as well. Thank you.